Practice 8-7, Factoring Special Cases. So as we discussed a couple of lessons ago, anytime you multiply a binomial by itself, you get a trinomial with a very specific pattern, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, for a plus b squared, or if you have a plus b times a minus b, you just get a squared minus b squared. So whenever you see a trinomial with that specific pattern, you can factor it to be a plus b squared. So let's take a look at this first one. We have x squared minus 9. So anytime you have a perfect square minus another perfect square, what we can do is just take the square root of the first one and the square root of the second one. And we know there's going to be two binomials, one with a plus and one with the minus. So in the first spot, we just put the square root of the first monomial, which is x squared. So we're going to square root that. So we have x and x. And in the second spot, we just put the square root of the second one. So 3 and 3. And this is your answer, x plus 3 times x minus 3. So once again, we have two perfect squares, n squared minus 4, a perfect square minus a perfect square. So we're going to make our two parentheses, one with a plus and one with a minus. And in the first spot, we're going to put the square root of the first monomial. So we have n and n. And in the second spot, we're going to put the square root of the second monomial, which is 4. So we have 2 and 2. N plus 2, n minus 2. This is your final answer. So lesson 7, we have 3n squared minus 3. So as you can see, there's no middle term, and as you can see, these are not perfect squares, but they both have a common factor that we can factor out before we do the two parentheses. So we're going to factor out the 3 first, and then what we have left inside the parentheses is 3n squared divided by 3, which is n squared, minus 3 divided by 3, which is 1. So now, as you can see, we have our perfect square minus a perfect square. So we're going to go down. We're going to keep this 3. We're going to write 3, and we're going to write our two parentheses. So once again, in our first spot, we're going to put the square root of the first term, which is n. And we're going to have 1 plus and 1 minus. And then we're going to put the square root of our second term, which is 1. So this is our final answer, 3 times n plus 1 times n minus 1. Number 10, as you can see, we have 3 terms now, b squared plus 4b plus 4. So this is our a, this is our 2ab, and this is our b squared. Okay, so since this is a plus right here, we're going to have two pluses. So we can say a plus b squared. So in the first one, we are going to find the square root of our first term, and that's b. And then we're going to find the square root of our second term. So the square root of 4 is 2. So our final answer is b plus 2 squared. Over here we have x squared plus 6x plus 9, and if we take the square root of 9, that's 3. 3 times 2 is 6, which means that this is a perfect square. So we're going to make our parentheses. Since this is a plus, we're going to put a plus sign, and this is going to be squared. So in the first spot, we're going to put the square root of our first term, which is x. And in the second spot, we're going to put the square root of our last term, and the square root of 9 is 3. So this is our final answer, x plus 3 squared. So once again, in number 16, we have a perfect square minus another perfect square. So we're going to make our two parentheses, one with a plus, one with a minus. And in the first spot, we're going to put the square root of the first term, which is d. And in the second spot, we're going to put the square root of our second term, 49, and the square root of 49 is 7. So this is our final answer, d plus 7 times d minus 7. So number 9, we have 4a squared minus 81. So we have a perfect square minus a perfect square. we're going to make our two parentheses, one with a plus and one with a minus. So in the first one, we're putting the square root of our first term. So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of a squared is a. So the square root of 4a squared is 2a. And that's what we put in the first spot of each set of parentheses. In the second spot, we put the square root of 81, which is 9. So we have 2a plus 9 times 2a minus 9. And this is our final answer. For number 22, we have a trinomial with a minus. So the square root of 25 is 5, and 5 times 2 is 10. So that means this is a perfect square of a binomial that is being subtracted. It's a square of a difference. So we are going to put in the first spot the square root of our first term, which is x. And in the second spot, we're going to put the square root of 25, which is 5. And this is our answer, x minus 5 squared. So number 25, so this is not a perfect square minus a perfect square, but since we only have two terms, we know it's not going to be a binomial squared. We know it's going to be a difference of squares. So the first thing we're going to do is look for the common factor in these two terms. Okay, so these both have a d, and these both have, and they're both multiples of 2. So what we can factor out is 2d. Okay, and then so in the first spot we put 2d to the third divided by 2d, which is d squared, minus 50d divided by 2d, which is 25. And now we have a perfect square minus a perfect square. So we're going to keep 2d on the outside, and we're going to make our two sets of parentheses, one with a plus and one with a minus. And once again, in the first spot, we put the square root of our first term, which is d. And in our second spot, we're going to put the square root of our second term. And the square root of 25 is 5. So our final answer is 2d times d plus 5 times d minus 5. So now we have 4r squared minus 25. We have a perfect square minus another perfect square. So we're just going to make our two parentheses. And in our first spot, we are going to put the square root of 4r squared, which is 2r. And in our second spot, we're going to put the square root of 25, which is 5. So we have 2r plus 5 times 2r minus 5. And this is our final answer. So this is it for practice 8-7. Move on to the third video for the last part of lesson 6.